Hello and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to discuss getting your mix ready for a master and also improving your mix at the same time. It goes hand in hand. So there's going to be three main points I'm going to cover. The first one is the bass, the low frequencies, always the hardest to mix, and there's a reason why, and I'm going to show you how to fix that. The stereo width, there's often problems in the stereo width because when we're mastering we like to widen the mix and make it sound a lot bigger, and also what's on your master bus. So without further ado, let's get into it. So let's talk about bass frequencies first. You'll find in a mix, a lot of the time you find the bass hard to mix, and a lot of the times you can't really hear any definition in the bass end, and there's a reason for that. Often, if you're not hearing any definition in the bass end, it's because it's being clouded up by spurious bass from other instruments further up in the mix. Now you could have a synth riff, a lead, or all sorts of different synthesizers or sounds or guitars or anything like that in the mix, and what you'll find a lot, particularly with the plugins, more so than hardware, what you find is you'll get your body of your sound and then it'll roll off, and then you'll see some information in the low end. Well, that is really not needed. If you're playing a lead and you've got information down here, you've got low end sub coming in on this lead. Why is it there? So what's happening, you've got all these spurious bass frequencies coming into the mix, and so you've got your lead with a bit of sub, and you've got your chord riff, and that's got a bit of sub. You've got a sampled hi-hat loop, and that's got a bit of sub. You've got various other instruments, all sorts of different things that really don't need any low frequencies have got this sub, and that all collects together and sums into this big cloud that covers up over the top of the actual bass that you want to hear. You want to compartmentalize that bass and you want to contain it in its own frequency band, but you can't because this other stuff is just clouding over it, and that's why you can't hear it. So what you need to do is high pass those low frequencies, just the low end that's not needed. You'll see where the body of the sound ends at the low end, and then you just bring in your high pass filter or your low cut or whatever you want to call it and get rid of that bass. Once you've done that, you'll be able to hear the mix a lot better. Hi-hats is a funny one because the 808s are sitting right up in the kilohertz, so you can get rid of everything below it, which is fine. But something like the 909 and some of the Akai hi-hats have got a much lower frequency. The thunk as the hi-hats were being struck with a stick is also contained in that sample. And so and that's what gives it the sound. So you don't want to get rid of that. You want to keep that in. That is one of the main things that gives it that real chunky sound, which is why it works so well in house music. So really you want to keep that in. So, but I would say around the 300 hertz and below, you should be able to see it on your analyzer anyway. But around 300 hertz and below, just cut that out. It's going to have spurious frequencies that you don't want. It's going to be aliasing in the samples, so get rid of it. Get rid of the low frequencies, and that's your bass done, and that will allow all your low frequencies that you want. And don't put your low cuts or your high pass filter on your bass lines, unless you've got two bass lines. You might have like a higher bass line and then you've got a sub. And if you've got a higher bassline, maybe you do want to cut a little bit off, but that's down to more down to taste and more down to the genre of music. When it comes to your bass, leave it where it is. Your 808 kicks, you want to leave every single bit of bass on there because you want them to rumble through in the club. Obviously, all your kick drums, your punchy kicks, everything, leave the bass where it is. If you find your kicks too bassy, you could always put a low shelf on it, and that. But that's mixing. That's down to your own decisions there. But what I'm saying is, get rid of all the bass frequencies that are not needed to let your high frequencies run through your mix nicely, and you'll find you'll be able to get a much louder mix. You'll be able to. Your mixes are going to be 100 times better. So the next thing I want to discuss is the stereo field. So in the stereo field, you really want your drums straight in the centre, right down the centre. And I'm talking your drums, you're talking your main drums, which is your kick, your snare and your hat. So your hi-hats, snare drum, kick, straight in the centre. The snare drum is a funny one. I find if you've got too much stereo width on a snare drum, it can really throw out all of the stereo width of other instruments, because your concentration's then on the snare drum, and the snare drum just takes over the whole mix, because it's not only planting straight into the middle of the speaker, but it's also got this big wide sound. You really don't want that. Hand claps, on the other hand, they can be wide. You can mix them wide, and the reason why is because a typical clap, if you can imagine an audience, clap, 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 it's going to sound wide. So of course you want that wide sound with a clap, and you could put a bit of chorus on. Wouldn't go overboard with it. Let's go back to the snare drum though. So don't mono it completely. You can in Logic there's an imaging piece of software called Direction Mixer, and that's, if you're using Logic, that's the best plugin to use for narrowing the sound down. But every DAW will have something that does that job. So with the snare drum, don't mono it completely. Give it a bit of breathing space, so you get that smash. You get a little bit of width, so it really sort of in your face. Because if it's down the centre, too hard down the centre, you're not going to get any breathing space. But just be careful how much width you do actually put on. The main thing with your snare drum, just hone it in and have it pretty much straight down the middle, but bring all the stereo width out of that, and that should sort that out. So that's your stereo width. Your percussion you can put all over the place. If you've got claves, if you've got rim shots, whatever, electro blip sounds for, you know, your little laser blips. They're great for, you can throw them all around the mix. You can just put a few in, chuck a stereo delay on so they go flying around the mix. They sound great. That's really good. But you certainly don't want the snare drum, which you want right down the middle, interfering with that lovely stereo width that's giving you all of that you know, amazing feeling in the club where you can, sounds are coming all over the place. Do you know what I mean? So really, yeah, stereo width. Pay attention to that and be careful about having any stereo width in the low end. This is going to be done at mastering stage anyway, but get your mixes ready. All your low synths, all your bass synths, bass frequencies, they really want to be mono. If more than anything, mono all your bass end. If you can do that in a mix, then when it comes to mastering, there's so much more scope we can do. We're not having to cancel everything out the low end because of this or that. The results of that can end up having phasing issues in a club. And if I'm mastering for vinyl, it would make the needle jump out of the groove, because when your low frequencies is your needle's moving like that, well, it's more like that, it's coming from the top, but your groove is like this. So your needle's in there, and if you've got too much width on your bass, it throws your needle, and you can get needle jumping out of the groove, and you really don't want that. If you spend a hell of a lot of money on pressing, which it does at the moment, it's quite expensive. But that's vinyl mastering. But you want to get your mix ready so it can be mastered, because I master for vinyl, I master for digital, I master for all the platforms. Every platform's got different requirements. So yeah, certainly when you come to doing your bass, you want to get minimal amount of stereo width in your bass end of the mix. It's quite a standard thing, quite a standard studio practice for that, for those reasons I've mentioned, with your club phasing and your needle not holding in the groove and stuff on vinyl. And the last thing I want to mention is the master bus. Now, I've had a few people send me stuff. I think one of the worst ones was I had a track in. Someone sent me in a mix and it had a distortion plugin in on the master bus, and it pulled everything into the centre. It's 2-track mix, but everything was centred. So the problem with that is when I come to master it and I'm trying to push the sides out on the mix, I had nowhere to go because it had just literally clumped everything into one place, and there was a very small area of movement that I could work with, but it wasn't enough to actually make a really good master. So I had to go back and say, look, the track's no good. You need to send me a new version of that. Take everything off the master bus. If you want distortion on a guitar, great, put it on your guitar. You want distortion on a bass drum, put it on your bass drum. You want distortion on your bass, put it on there. You want distortion on your riffs, put it on. Don't put it on a master bus, because it's on your mix. Your mix is, you do all that work with all your panning, and then you go and wreck it with the master bus. And this is another thing which I'm going to come on to, and this is a touchy subject because I have mentioned it before in the community, the synthwave community in particular, and I know there is some genres of house, some subgenres of house that undertake this, and it is sidechain compression and it's sidechaining everything to the kick. It's a trend. It's certainly not a good technique. It doesn't improve your mix, and once it's on there, there's no way of fixing it. So, by all means, if you have a bass line with a bass frequency, certainly use a sidechain underneath the kick to separate that bass. So when the kick triggers, you've got it ducks. So it ducks under the kick as the kick triggers. That way it doesn't interfere with the kick. You've got a nice powerful kick, and your bass line, you don't actually notice, if you're careful with it, you don't actually notice any difference in the level of the bass line, because the kick's already taken over. So you've got the kick drum, you've got the bass line ducking under nicely, and it just ducks under where the kick drum. So as the envelope of the kick comes out, the decay, the bass line's being reintroduced, so you really do not notice it. You don't notice it, and it sounds really good. Don't put anything else on there, because as soon as you start putting pads and vocals or anything like that, chords and all that sort of stuff, everything ducks under at the same time. Everything. It sounds like a washing machine. I listen to a lot of my mixes. I've got my monitoring set up. So I've got a couple of pairs of speakers that I use for my monitoring setup, and I also use the car. It's good for checking the mix. The car is awesome in pretty much every respect, because the acoustics in a car are basically the best you can get. Best acoustics because of all the different shapes. So many different shapes, your windscreens, and I know glass isn't a great thing for acoustics and sound escaping, but a car system is really where you want to check your mixes out. So go and check your mix in the car if you've got a car. If you haven't got a car, go and take it to a friend. Find a friend who's got a pretty good sound system, who likes her music and stuff, that hasn't thrown too much into their a system that's set up nicely, basically. That's where you want to be checking your mixes. So when it comes to sidechain compression, the synthwave community have got this habit of chucking the whole mix into this compressor that's sidechained to the bass drum. So, and everything ducks under it. It sounds like a washing machine, and it's really unlistenable in the car. If I hear a track that's if the whole mix has been sidechained into the kick drum, I'll switch it off. I'll move the track on, and I'll give it back to whoever and say you need to mix that down again. So bear in mind, synthwave tracks. It's not so common now. It was a few years ago, but it's not so common now. But people are still doing it, and I have had a few. But if you listen to the commercially released tracks, like Blinding Lights or tracks like that, his vocal doesn't duck underneath the kick drum, and there's a reason for that, because if it did, it wouldn't have got into the charts. So if you want your music to be successful, if you want a world-class master, then make sure you follow the steps. Get your mixes ready for mastering, and then I'll take it from there. And rather than taking a rubbish mix or an average mix and making a mediocre master, you give me a really good mix with all of those little tricks. There's not a lot to think about. There's only a few things. There's the 3 main points that I've mentioned, and that's it. And go and listen to your mix in a car. The only thing that I would suggest to put on a master bus is analysis software. Now there's a free plugin called Span by Voxengo, and that is really good for checking out your mix. You can change the time base in it, so you want to slow it down so you get an average, so all your frequencies are averaging rather than going like when you switch it on initially. You've got this. It does have a couple of presets in it, and it does have one that says master. If you're not too familiar with time-based plugins or anything like that, time-based analysis, just stick it on master and watch what the waveform's doing there. You can use it for mid-side as well if you know what you're doing, but there's quite a bit of setting up. I'm not going to go into that. The other thing is, and the reason why I say use Span for checking your mix out, because it's already got the 4.5 dB tilt, which is the difference between your hearing and your analysis and stuff. So plugins need to have that. Some of the other plugins might not have that, so this is why I'm suggesting use the Span plugin, stick it on master, stick it on a master bus. When you render the file, make sure that the Span plugin or whatever it is you're using is switched off. I mean, if you know about the 4.5 dB tilt, then that's fine, then you use whatever plugin you want. But I'm just saying, for mix engineers, this is more going down that sort of area. So I wanted to say a huge thanks to all my long-standing clients who are continuing to use my services, and all the positive messages, all the amazing feedback I've had of, it really means a lot to hear back from the bands. It means a lot to me when I'm mastering, when I'm turning something and I can really hear the magic coming out in the music. I can really feel the artist, so I really understand where you're coming from, and I really appreciate all the messages you've sent, all the tracks you've sent in. Amazing work, everybody I work with. I really appreciate your music, and it's a pleasure to work with. And I'd also like to say thanks to all the new people that have come in. There's been quite an influx of new clients, and I just wanted to say thanks to those as well. And it's those people I'm directing the video to, mainly because I've already spoken to my long-standing clients over emails and discussed all of this, and obviously this is why I'm making a video, because it's a lot easier to just watch this and say, right, I know what I'm doing now, rather than me keep sending me the same thing over and over. And I look forward to hearing everybody's mixes. Certainly the new artists that are coming to me, I'm really looking forward to hearing your music as well. And thanks ever so much for watching, thanks ever so much for listening, and I can't wait to hear all your latest mixes now. It's a real pleasure. Thanks ever so much for watching. Bye for now.